Hello students, welcome to Physics Wallah. Today we are going to have a very interesting session of answer writing with respect to the anthropology optional. Students, remember what generally happens is we keep on studying, keep on mugging up, keep on writing, and the problem that we face is we are not able to structure or meet the demand of the stuff we are understanding or writing. Remember one thing, answer writing is simply not just putting down the points. It has various dimensions. Like the most important dimension is how you structure your answer. Now this jargon structure keeps on coming and people even do not know what's the meaning of the word structure. When we say structure, it basically means what should come in the introduction, what are the various dimensions that should be involved in the answer that you are writing, what should be the proper content, what do we need to mention any case study, do we need to mention any for that matter example, what should be in the conclusion. Remember, we say or take it for granted that there is no need to write conclusion, or for that matter introduction can be like some normal introduction. No, in the UPSC examination the examiners actually give you marks for the introduction and conclusion. So a proper structure along with quality content, writing in proper duration is what is very important with respect to the answer writing. And another thing is, because we are studying so much, what happens is generally we have a lot of content. Now what happens is, because we have so much content, we need to write so much in the answer, and then we are not able to complete our paper. So what is important is that you practice answer writing along with the timing in mind. For example, if you have to do a particular answer in say 7 minutes, restrict yourself to that timing. Initially, you'll be having problems, but with time and practice, you'll achieve it. So let's take one example of a question that has actually been asked in the Union Public Service Commission examination, and repeatedly, I think every one or alternative year, this question is asked, the topic related to fertility and fecundity. Now, if you take this example and understand how I'm going to structure the answer, you will get a brief idea how you need to write in the UPSC exam. So let's start with today's agenda, that is of answer writing, right? And the question that we are taking is a simple one. But what happens is, when the simple question that comes for the 10 markers, you do not write effective answer, you tend to get very low marks. This question can be asked in your 15 marker as well as your 10 markers, and it has repeatedly been asked. So let's see how we can actually structure this answer before we actually frame the answer, right? The moment I see, write a note, right, on fertility and fecundity. Now what should be the structure of this answer, right? Structure. In the introduction, it's very important that you write precise definition of the concept that are being asked. See, earlier trend used to be they just simply used to mention a particular topic, 10 marker fertility, or write a note on fertility. So what happens is you can write various dimensions associated with that. But now what the new trend is, they're generally giving you two terminologies. Now there's a purpose behind it, which I'm going to tell you why they are giving you these two terms, right? Introduction is in simple words, but using a thinker. Define both the terms. What generally students are doing, or I have observed, is that when they see these two terms, they write everything about fertility, for example, and then they might be starting and writing about fecundity. So what happens is the coherence lacks. And what happens is, in spite of writing what they know, and that is right also, but they do not get good marks. So there's a purpose behind giving these two terms. You need to relate these two terms and explain using the relation. That is why you are given these two terms together. And this is a purpose behind the new trend from the past year, that they are asking two terms in one statement, right? You define both the terms. This will be a precise and a good introduction for this answer. Next would come is the body of your answer. In the body, what is you're going to do is you've already defined the term. Now next would be the relationship. In the relationship, right, about fertility and fecundity, how they are related to each other. Now this would meet the demand or the purpose why UPSC has mentioned these two terms together. So that you satisfy, what is the purpose behind these two terms is that the UPSC wants to test whether you can relate these two terms or not. How are they different, how they're similar, and they're understanding your IQ and the knowledge or application of the stuff or the material that you have studied, right? So first part is going to be the relationship. Second, you can write what are the differences between these two terms. This would form the second dimension or aspect of your answer. Third, see, we are going to do all this and explain. This is simply a structure first, then we're going to explain how you're going to write the answer and what are the points going to be there in your answer writing, right? This is just a brief structure for your understanding. Third, factors that influence them. See, there are various common factors and certain differences also, but because it is going to be a 10 marker, you cannot go into that much detail. So you can take the common factors that are influencing fecundity and fertility, and you can write it over here. This is smart work, right? So you smartly are actually giving another dimension also and meeting the purpose or the demand of the question that is being asked by the UPSC. Next, you're going to write, you can mention a case study over here just to add the objectivity to your answer and make the examiner feel that you have studied this topic well. Case study, or you can mention an example for that matter, or examples, right? Now, this is going to be your body. Now, next comes the conclusion. Remember one thing, whenever you study any topic in anthropology, be it physical anthropology, cultural anthropology, mention the relevance in the conclusion or how it is applicable in today's or day-to-day study. That sums up that sums up basically the level of knowledge and the understanding that you have. So we're going to write the contemporary relevance of fertility and fecundity. So this is your structure. In the introduction, you're going to define both the terms. In the body, you're going to mention what is the relationship between both the terms. Then you're going to mention what are the differences between fertility and fecundity. Then you're going to mention what are the factors that are affected or influenced. And then you have to mention the case study along with examples, or example or case study, whatever you want to mention, just to add the objective nature. And then in the conclusion, you have to mention the relevance. Now let's start with the answer, right? We're going to again switch back and tell you what, how, and when, and the way we are dealing with this structure, right? So first is the introduction. See, when we generally study fertility, it is generally defined as the ability to produce offsprings in abundance. This is a layman's definition that we study about fertility. But when we study with respect to anthropological point of view, it is basically the actual birth performance. So students, in the previous slide when I was explaining you the structure of the answer, I had explained you what we're going to write in the introduction. That is the definition that has to be precise and to the point. So when we are going to write here, we're going to mention about fertility, and then we're going to mention fecundity. As I mentioned, see, in simple words also we can define the ability to have maximum offsprings or having offspring is in abundance, or healthy offspring is basically fertility in layman's perspective. But if I have to use an anthropological dimension, I have to mention a thinker. For example, W.J. Wood. He defines fertility as the actual birth performance. What you can do is, when you're writing the introduction, in the introduction itself mention WJ Wood defines fertility as this, and then you can write a normal definition in few words so that it is clearer to the examiner also what you're going to mention. In fecundity also, WJ Wood has actually defined fecundity as the biological capacity to reproduce. That means whether you are capable of reproducing or not, biological capacity, right? As we have already mentioned in the lecture also, what these terms are. Over here, we are not going to go into that much detail, just the structure, how it is going to be written, right? So in the introduction, this will form a good introduction to the point, precise, crisp, that meets the demand of the introduction, right? So let's move on to the next part. But before that, again, I told you we'll go back and revise what it is there. See, in the introduction, define both the terms. This we have done, right? Now we'll go on to the next part, that is the relationship. Then we're going to do the differences, factors, and the case studies, right? So next is the body. First thing was the relationship. In the lecture also of fertility and fecundity, I had made a graph and showed how both the terms are related. Now see, when you're writing in the examination, make sure that you draw this graph and write it in few lines and explain what the relationship. You don't have to write stories, right? Now you can put it in your own words, just understand what the graph is. This represents the number of offsprings or children, right? And this is extrapolated graph. Now when we study fecundity, let us assume over here FC represents fecundity and simple F represents fertility, right? The top of this is the maximum biological capacity, or this point. This is going to be your FC, right? Now fertility will vary because a person can have one child, a person can have 2 children, 3 children, 4 children, and so on till it reaches the maximum biological capacity. So that means the relationship can be fertility is always less than or equal to the fecundity. It cannot exceed. This forms the part. A simple word. See, what is there is you have mentioned, drawn, and represented it. For the examiner, it will be very easy to decipher the level of understanding that you're having. And you can just line 1 or 2 lines in order to mention what you're actually drawn, right? This is going to be the first part of your body relationship. Now, second part is going to be the differences between fertility and fecundity. Differences. See, now when you are writing the differences, make sure that you draw a table. Again, fertility and fecundity. And then you write the various differences that are there between these two terminologies. See, in brief, I'll mention, because this is basically an answer writing session, not a lecture per se. So I'll just mention what are the differences and you can understand from the lecture itself also. So first, we have already mentioned the definition. So you can basically, there is no need to mention the definition over here. So we can straight away go on to the concepts and various differences that are there. For example, this word fertility is a quantitative term. It is a qualitative term. We have already discussed in lecture in depth why it is qualitative and why it is quantitative, because in fertility we can measure it, because fertility rate is XYZ 2.1, 2.2. So it is a quantitative term, whereas this is a biological capacity. So it is basically a qualitative term, right? Then it is modifiable. This is not, because you studied in the lecture also, fertility rate can vary. See, once upon a time there was fertility was 5, now it is 2.2 in India. It might reproduce further, reduce further also. So the number of children that are there or being produced by a couple varies upon various biological, cultural factors and also their choice. So fertility rate can be varied, so that is fertility can be varied. But this is a maximum potential to reproduce, so that is fixed, that cannot be varied, so it is non-modifiable. Third is, when we're talking about fertility, we're basically talking about the female gender, or we're talking about women. Over here we're talking about male as well as female, because biological capacity to reproduce or not can be in case of women also and men also. For example, men might not be having the testicles, so they do not have the biological capacity to reproduce. Females might not be having the uterus, so biological capacity to reproduce is not there. So fecundity refers to both genders or sexes. Over here it refers only to the female per se. When we are talking about the next point, we can mention the opposite of fertility is infertility, while opposite of fecundity is sterility. What does it mean? Infertility means that the person has a biological capacity to reproduce, but the person is not reproducing because of some reasons. For example, as mentioned in the lecture also, the postpartum infertility means due to the hormonal changes on the ovulatory cycle and all, the woman is not able to reproduce for some time. That is a postpartum infertility, but that doesn't mean that she has lost the ability to reproduce. That means infertility term is being used. When we talk about sterility, it means the biological capacity for a particular organism, or we're talking about anthropology, so human specific, does not have the biological capacity to reproduce, right? For example, transgenders, they do not have the biological capacity to reproduce. So these are going to be your some differences that you have to mention, right? Now let's come on to the next part, that is the factors, right? So let's again go back and what was the structure. See, we had mentioned about the relationship we have done, differences we have done, the factors also we have done, and now factors actually we're going to do right now, and then case study and then the conclusion. So let's move on and study what are the factors. See, just remember, when we are writing about the factors, because it is supposedly a 10 marker, you cannot write many factors, right? Always divide it into two dimensions. One is biological, other is cultural, right? Because the question is of 10 or 15 marks, so you cannot segregate what are the factors different for fertility and fecundity. You can club them because there are various common factors also, right? So biological and cultural. For example, in the lecture also we have mentioned, like in the biological you can probably write about age, right? Now with respect to age, we have generally seen in a study by the University of Maryland, they had observed that in the age of 20 to 30, the fecundity is maximum, and after that it starts declining, and before that obviously it is less, right? And then you can definitely mention about the, for example, ovulatory cycle issues or uterus issues, whether it is present or not, whether testicles are present or not. So that means over here a broad understanding, over here we can mention issues related to reproductive organs. There might be various issues associated with that. For example, if there are issues with the uterine wall, then the issue often happens that there is problem with respect to conceiving, right? If the uterus is not present only, then obviously it is impossible to conceive. So these dimensions, and there can be various dimensions, environment and various dimensions can be there. So you can write 3-4 dimensions over here. With respect to cultural, you can mention about, say, religion. In certain religions, for example, using contraceptives is not allowed or not promoted. So what happens is fertility in those countries can be more, right? So cultural can be, for example, religion, right? Then it can be about the level of thinking, for example, maturity of thinking. That means behavior, right? So these dimensions can be added in your cultural aspect and various other, depending upon your choice, because had the question being mentioned the factors, then you had to mention in them in detail, because it is a 10 marker, you cannot go into detail, you will not have the time also, right? So mention in brief, because you've already mentioned this, all that, it will cover the space. You have 2 sides for a 10 marker and that would be enough for you to write, right? Just mention in brief and then you can move on to the next part, the 4th part of that, that is case study, right? Now for example, you can just mention about a case study that was recently reported by the World Health Organization when they were studying countries like Syria, Lebanon, and they studied that the amount of stress that is generated due to the war is actually adversely affecting the psychological state of the women. When it is affecting the psychological state of the women, it tends to lead to hormonal imbalances. When it leads to the hormonal imbalances, it reduces the fertility also. So this is one of the studies that was done by World Health Organization, and you can mention. And similarly, remember in the newspapers, various case studies keeps on coming. You can just read them and remember them. If you want, you can note them down. Such case studies, what it is like, it is like an icing on the cake. When you mention those case studies, it differentiates your answer from the rest of the answer that the examiner is checking. So you can put out just a creative thing, you can put on case study over here, because other case studies examples we've already mentioned in the previous parts of the answer. This was the core of the body. Now comes the conclusion. I had mentioned in the conclusion you need to write the contemporary relevance, right? What does it mean? See, how does fertility and fecundity help you? Like, it is helping you in family planning, right? It is helping in public policies, right? In understanding a study of diseases also, epidemiology. So various dimensions, you can add various things. So what happens is, it gives a practical application of the concept that you have studied. See, this is something that you use your own mind and do it, right? So this is a broad structure. We'll just recap it again, what we have done. We had to, structure was introduction, defining both terms, relationship, the differences between the 2 terms, and then the factors influencing them, and then we have the case study that we have mentioned about Syria and Lebanon, and then the contemporary relevance, right? We had defined fertility and fecundity in the terms given as fertility and fecundity given by J. Wood, and both the terms have been defined here. And then we went on to find the relationship between them, and then we have given the differences, and then the factors. See, you don't have to remember that this is a question, you don't have to go into much detail in the factors, because that will eat up the time and space, right? And then the case study of Syria, Lebanon, you can mention any case study you feel like, and then you can mention about the contemporary relevance. So this is one of the examples in way we are going to approach the answer writing session for the anthropology optional. I hope you like them. Try to structure your answer in this manner. This is a very effective way. It is going to impress the examiner and definitely help you in getting better marks. Thank you and happy learning.